Welcome to the Academy of Esports podcast. I'm your host, James O'Hagan. I'm here today with Marcus Howard. He is the president of the Tampa Association of Gaming. Marcus, thank you for taking so much time to be with us on the podcast today.
Thank you for the invitation, James. This is a great podcast series, and I'm honored to be one of your guests.
Thank you. And I thank you for saying that, because I've been following your work and your posts on LinkedIn. They're always something that really draws my attention. They always bring about quite a bit of information and some interesting challenges, not just to esports, but the IT industry in general. And the thing that I've been following you and tracking you on for quite some time has been related to not just your involvement in esports, but also in blockchain. And blockchain is something that, as much as I've read about it, and I'm not some, I'm working on my doctorate in instructional technology myself. So blockchain to me feels like something I should be able to get and understand right out the gate. And we've had some back and forth conversation over chat in the last couple of days, just to try to give me kind of a basic footing. But, there's a lot of teachers, a lot of parents, and maybe even some scholar gamers who have heard about blockchain, but don't really understand what it is that they're hearing about. Can you try to summarize blockchain in a way that's going to help a layperson like myself to really kind of grasp at least the basics of it?
Sure. And I get that question a lot, so don't feel bad about not quite knowing what it is yet. And I think it overcomplicates itself, or the ecosystem overcomplicates it. I think the easiest way to understand it is it's basically a fancy database and loyalty program kind of meshed into one, right? So just like a database has, you've used 3.5 floppy, you've used a database, you've used Excel to store data. It stores information, and then it also, the cryptocurrency portion of it is kind of, again, the fancy loyalty program. And the way I typically explain to people is it's almost exactly like the internet, but I see it as the natural and inevitable evolution of the internet. And the difference here is that this structure is encrypted, decentralized, and distributed by default, right? So if you look at traditional internet, kind of the client server model you may be familiar with, for example, if LinkedIn ever goes down, right, none of us have access to LinkedIn because all the data, all the information, the service as a whole resides on LinkedIn servers, and then we use it as clients on our desktops or our mobile phones. But with blockchain, because it's a distributed and decentralized network, if one node goes down, the rest of the app, the network, can continue to operate because the code and the data is stored on every node.
Every node meaning every user.
That's right. And I'm using tech speak again, so let me backtrack. A node is a device. A node is a device. So that can be anything from your desktop computer to your mobile phone to an Xbox. If it was running the software that operates the app, then it is technically a node. So,
and I sent you this question yesterday. If those of us who have watched or followed the HBO show Silicon Valley, they presented an idea called PiperNet, which sounds like where everybody kind of had the network on their phone, right? That everybody had control over their data, complete and control over their data, and there was no centralization. There wasn't any way for anybody to necessarily steal anybody's data because everybody had it, but it was all encrypted and secure. Is that kind of what we're talking about?
That is. I've seen a couple of episodes. I'm still in the first season of Silicon Valley, so you may have hit me with a spoiler there.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
But it's okay. It's okay. I haven't watched in a couple of days because I'm working probably too much. But exactly that, what you explained, it's where everyone, the best case scenario, everyone has control over their data and the ability to grant permission or access to that data to individuals or businesses. And that's what we don't really have right now. Two perfect examples that come immediately to mind is the Equifax hack, right? 54% of Americans were affected by that because all of the data existed in one place on the centralized server, and Equifax had control of that data, not us as end users whose information we actually own that information, but they had it and they took our ownership from us. And then the other example is Facebook, notorious with Cambridge Analytica. Our information, our use patterns, our demographic information, they sold without our permission overseas. And whatever you feel about the elections, in 2016, that had an impact on the elections. So what I see blockchain, one of the greatest benefits to business and society is really empowering the end user to take control over their data.
So an example right now, even as I'm thinking about as you're talking about this, is one of the concerns that people have is is TikTok, and where does my data go, and who is using it? If TikTok was a blockchain application, let's say, there wouldn't be necessarily there would be no way to have this fear, I guess.
Exactly.
Would it be warranted? Sorry.
Yeah, the way the blockchain works is it has a private key and a public key. The best way that I explain that is that the public key is like your mailbox to your house, right? Anybody can send things to it. And then your private key is like the key that you hold to your front door. You're the only one who has access to that. So while anyone can send you things to your public key and you can go retrieve it using your private key, no one can get into your house without your private key, right? So if you imagine a network of apps where you're using that public key, private key pair to secure and authorize transactions, then because you're the only one who owns your private key, TikTok, if it was a blockchain app, would never have the ability to come get your information.
Interesting. That's really interesting. Now, the caveat or the catch with that, though, is if whatever your private key is, if you lose it, then you lose access to your house, if you will.
Yes, perfect example. I bought about half a Bitcoin in 2014. I don't own a bunch of crypto. Actually, I don't own any crypto right now. And I day traded it over 2 or 3 weeks and tripled my investment. And then that was around the same time, right after that is when, or that was right after I started Project MQ. And over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, because I still had my day job, I was so busy that I couldn't keep up with the notifications from the crypto exchange that housed my crypto. At some point, they deprecated support for the coin and the wallet I was using. They kept sending me notices saying, warning, we're about to start charging you maintenance fees. You have 9 months, 6 months, 3 months to make this change, or we're going to start charging you fees. I never did that. So over the course of the next year and a half, they feed away all of that $1,200. And then ultimately, I lost the key to that wallet. So even if it did have money in it, I have no access to it because I don't have the key.
Oh, wow. So so I think it's important to say that blockchain, while it has a lot of promise, there's a great deal of digital responsibility also when we're talking about this. This isn't just like, getting your login through Facebook and then, if I forget my password, you're just going to email me another one. Because again, that creates a hole in the security, that creates a hole in the encryption right there, right?
Exactly. The same way they tell you not to set, PASS1234 as your password, right? It may be convenient, or it may even be convenient to share your passwords in between sites, but that convenience comes at the price of security. So additional security comes at the price of convenience. In this case, is additional responsibility. And now blockchain is trying to evolve to a point where they can give you like a socially distributed password where you and maybe your 4 or 5 closest friends and family create a composite key, which is taking a larger item made up of smaller segments. And if you happen to lose your password, you can basically make a request to your parents and your siblings, and together, when they respond to you, you can then reassemble your key and get your password back. That's kind of an evolving piece of technology. But before then, if you lost your password, you just lost whatever it was connected to.
Sure. Now, blockchain, of course, is more than Bitcoin. It's evolving. It's getting involved in other things. And I believe that there's also applications that you have started to share with everybody as far as you're posting ideas around blockchain and esports. Can you kind of introduce us to that idea a little bit?
Sure. And one of those opportunities is with a company I advise. So shameless plug here is Game Credits. Is the world's first gaming cryptocurrency. It was created in 2014. They're creating an esports tournament platform on the blockchain so that they can verify that who's competing and if there are prizes, who has access to the prizes, if they won, if they're being matched fairly. Because again, the blockchain mathematically introduces trust into untrusted networks. But I think the easiest thing for most people to wrap their heads around is if you think about traditional sports betting, and then think about the gaming industry and the issue with like loot boxes and that whole issue around like skins with like CSGO, right? You have potentially kids under the age of 18 gambling with with skins that they got from loot boxes. If you could leverage the blockchain to verify mathematically that someone is of the appropriate age to gamble, you can immediately eliminate underage gambling.
Wow, that's kind of a big statement.
It is.
And that's a pretty powerful idea. But people may see a lot of this too and think, is there overkill? Is there using blockchain inappropriately? Are we gonna do maybe too much, or is it appropriate for every instance? Say, for example.
It's a great question, and give a shout out to Samson Williams. He's a thought leader in the blockchain space, and you can probably see some of his thoughts about the space on LinkedIn. He posts regularly and is active in the global community. His joke is that, blockchain isn't Frank's Red Hot. You can't put that on everything, right? I don't know if you can on your podcast. I don't know if kids will listen to this later, but you can't put that bleep on everything.
Well, but you did talk about, though, I mean, you can't put it on everything, but you have spoken specifically about how blockchain can be used to build a better community. And we know in esports that we have a tremendous issue with our community. We're trying to fix that through education. Our scholastic esports scene, at least the high school level, is trying to do things where, we're trying to build walled gardens to teach kids how to be good digital citizens. We're trying to work with our educators to make sure that they're aware of what is happening on the scene. And you described a perfect situation of using blockchain to eliminate gambling. How can blockchain build a better community? If we are teaching digital citizenship in these communities where kids will learn and fail, does blockchain A, protect kids in these digital spaces, and B, does it allow for teaching to occur? Again, who is the gatekeeper in all this?
The gatekeeper ultimately becomes the community. That's it hasn't quite yet happened in the blockchain space, but I think that's again, a best case ideal scenario is where we no longer rely on the US dollar to represent all businesses and all communities. I'm not saying that the US dollar will go away, and I firmly believe that fiat currency has its place in society, but I see blockchain evolving as a subset of micro communities. So maybe the esports community has an esports coin instead of everyone leveraging the US dollar, right? Maybe the school that you teach at has its own coin. We're getting ready to roll forward with not AAA. That's the indie side of my brain. The NCAA, one of the top ranking NCAA schools is a client for us in our new product that's going to be launching this fall. And one of the things we're going to be helping them do is introduce their own coin to represent their school community. So it helps you create that sense of loyalty amongst the members in the community. Whereas having a dollar, just using a dollar, has no branding associated with it. There are no barriers to it. But if you have something that's confined within a community, then people naturally build an attachment to that community.
And it's interesting, how people think, and I think there was something you wrote, I don't know if you wrote or if it was in one of your videos, where, people, that idea, Bitcoin may scare people, but that idea of just creating your own currency and how it exchanges between different groups may sound scary, but the United States currency has been off the gold standard since Nixon was in office. And people wonder, where is the value of our money? Well, the value in our money is in the trust that we have. I think one of the best things I've seen recently about, trust in currency and how fragile it can possibly be was an episode of Rick and Morty where he takes down the galactic government by turning the value of one of their currencies to zero of their currencies. And it was like, because there's nothing backing it up. Just like with now, it's faith and trust in the United States government that does this. It's just the currency is in a different medium at this point, right?
No, I agree 100%. It's a social contract. And again, I think that fiat currency serves a purpose in society. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it will or ever should go away. But it's like you said, it's just the full faith and trust of our global economy and our national economy that makes the dollar have the value that it does. Like, just a perfect point you mentioned, the gold standard was dropped in 1971. And right now, there's counterfeiting happens across the board in every major market. So it's just us believing that the dollar has value is the only reason it has value. If you saw the link I sent you, I said, Bitcoin is monopoly money. Yes, but technically so is the US dollar.
Except the US dollar could be counterfeited and Bitcoin cannot be counterfeited.
That's right. That's one of the great
because of the blockchain.
Yeah, because it's on the blockchain. And it's funny too, because a lot of people think there was a lot of propaganda early on 2016, 2017, especially when that kind of purchasing spike where the price went up to like $20,000 per coin. Governments were saying that it's phony money and it's used to facilitate these illegal transactions, and that is true. But they say it in a vacuum, like that same thing doesn't apply to the U.S. dollar. The difference is that actually there is no anonymity in Bitcoin, right? The guy who got arrested with the Silk Road, who created the Silk Road, he got arrested because they were able to triangulate his location in a library based on the track record of his purchases and transactions on the blockchain. Because every transaction on Bitcoin transaction on the blockchain since it launched in January 3rd, 2009 is all public information.
Now, and I swear people who are watching this going, where does this come into esports? All right. Because there's probably people who are going, this is the Academy of Esports. I wasn't expecting, an introduction to blockchain to this level, but I find it just so fascinating that it's one of these things. It's just tickling the part of my brain. It's like, I can feel that there's a breakthrough. There's a potential here with this that I haven't yet seen or discussed with you yet, but you're also heavily involved in the indie gaming scene. Where does blockchain and the indie gaming scene start to coalesce, if you will?
Another great question. So we had a design for our platform, which was pre-pivot, where we wanted to build an ecosystem that was completely gamified. And the reason we wanted to do that was to give indie developers something that they could spend of value as a substitute for cash in our ecosystem. Because most indie developers are small businesses. Most of them are bootstrapped. They have day jobs on nights and weekends. They build their games. So they may not have money to pay for the display advertising or goods and services that you might expect someone like an EA or a Nintendo can pay for. So we wanted to reward them for creating their games in our ecosystem and sharing that creation process with our cryptocurrency that we would then allow them to spend on display advertisements and things of that nature, where they otherwise could not afford it in cash. With cash. The same thing with gamers in our ecosystem. We wanted to reward them for discovering amazing indie games from around the world. We wanted to reward them with our cryptocurrency that they would then use to pay for skins and wallpapers and potentially even purchase full games with our cryptocurrency in lieu of cash, which is particularly valuable for someone who may be under the age of 18 who might not have a full-time job or any kind of job. They have an abundance of time, but not an abundance of money. So if they're going to be viewing media and socializing, communicating anyway, why not reward them for that and give them something that they want using our currency they otherwise couldn't pay for with their own limited currency?
See, now, I knew we were going to get to this because, again, my brain's getting tickled on all this, right? So here's what I'm thinking, right? What you just described isn't just for the developer, but it's for the gamer. And one of the issues that we've got in esports is we know that there's more than League of Legends, Rocket League, Smash Brothers, and Overwatch. There's a lot of games that, again, you go on Steam and you just, you'll find them, but you don't necessarily know how they are. And again, you got to have money, or it's a demo. If you're lucky, if you can, they got a demo. But what you're talking about here, too, in a lot of ways, and I want to preface this first by saying I've spoken about how gamification can be overused, because again, you're taking something people want to say, oh, let's gamify esports. Esports is already intrinsically motivating. Don't gamify the thing that kids are already wanting to do. Gamify the things that they are hesitant to do. And what you're saying is let's gamify the research and the finding of these titles by kids or anybody, but find these titles, gamify that so that then they can, again, instead of having to pay to play, if you will, necessarily, they're still able to, in ways, earn currency through play to extend their gaming experience, if you will. Am I getting that right?
Exactly. And so what it does as well is it then creates that loyalty. Again, blockchain and Bitcoin, cryptocurrency is just a fancy loyalty program. It establishes that loyalty between a gamer and now the game developer, because they now have the ability to go spend this currency that they've built for the purposes of building a community, right? Being a part of the developer's audience, follow that developer's journey from the back of the napkin to the gold release, right? Into the Steam sale afterwards. where right now they don't currently have that incentive to do so. So they're defaulting to whatever they think is cool based on whichever company can afford to pay Ninja to stream the game.
And what's great about this too, again, we're coming into such unconventional times in education, and we're coming into unconventional times in scholastic esports as well, where, again, my school district, where not all of my kids have access to gaming PCs at home. A lot of them have unreliable internet. We're looking at ways we can bring in different titles that are maybe going to be more equitably accessible to kids. We're trying to find ways that we can be synchronous and asynchronous. And what you're describing for me is an opportunity for kids to find those titles. And while there is that extrinsic motivation to find a game or a title that they love and really start to develop their own esports ecosystem around that title and share it and produce it and give it to other kids and say, hey, we need to build something around this. It's kind of a, again, we're taking this awful instance here and potentially finding ways that, again, I think scholastic esports is one of the most misunderstood segments of the gaming sphere. People seem to think we want to be a pipeline to the pros, and we don't want to be a pipeline to the pros. We want to develop kids who want to be coaches and game developers and IT, but also develop tournaments and develop their own rule sets so we don't have to do all the work, because those kids have that love and that passion. I see such tremendous power for this potentially for the indie gaming scene.
Exactly. Imagine if at your school you could create an incentive program for students, having good attendance and getting good grades, where they can then earn this cryptocurrency. And if you had the network of indie games, they can spend that currency to redeem free games, right? Just for being good students at school. It's like the best way I can equate it to is the Book It program for Pizza Hut. I don't know if you ever experienced that, but when I was in grade school, elementary school, they had a program, and I think they actually still run this program, where if you went and read a number of books off of the approved reading list, which was a partnership between Pizza Hut and your local school, you would get a star. And every time, it wasn't just an empty participation award star, right? Every time you collected a certain number of these stars, you could go to Pizza Hut and redeem it for a free pizza. And then if enough students in your class did that same thing, now your entire class wins a free pizza party sponsored by Pizza Hut. It boosted literacy through the roof for the the K through 12 program.
The only catch, and I guess the only difference that I see, and it's important to say because I've spoken about this as well too, is libraries do this typically during the summer. They'll have some kind of a partnership program where they say, hey, read 5 or 7 books this summer, and you'll earn, put your name in on a raffle. The problem with it was, again, looking at it through the lens of self-determination theory, you've got kids who are already reading. And when you start to put extrinsic motivations on things that they already love to do, you can actually start to shift their intrinsic love towards an extrinsic motivation, which again, they'll see that they only have to read 7 and maybe they'll only read 7. But where I see the big difference in this right now is a lot of kids are stuck on those 4 big titles, 4 or 5 or 6, Call of Duty, Rainbow Six, they've got this amazing library in front of them. And kids are focused on the, 4 or 6 titles that are currently what we would consider, esports sanctionable, if you will. The developers have put a lot of money and effort in behind these. But, I think too around, the experience like Jay Collins, who I've interviewed several times on the podcast before at Hathaway Brown with an all-girls school, where they started to look at all the traditional titles, and the girls said, this may work well for the pro scene or whatever, but this doesn't work for us. We need to find something else. And they went out and found those different titles that were going to work for their competitive structure and building it in Cleveland, in and around Cleveland, Ohio. Again, what you're talking about is you're talking about taking that amazing library that's potentially out there that nobody's read or very few people have read, and saying, let's use this tool, this ability to incentivize finding these different games, because kids love to play. They love to find new games. They like to be the first one to play something. Hey, let's incentivize all this. I think again, it sounds fantastic, especially now. Am I getting this all right? Am I figuring this all out? Am I putting this all together?
Yeah, you're very close to where our pivot's going with our new company.
Okay.
And it's cool. It's cool. We're going to make it a major announcement hopefully later this month, now that we're in August. But what we noticed is that, Rocket League and League of Legends and Minecraft and Clash of Clans and PUBG and what's that other game? Brawlhalla. Those are all technically started by indie studios. Smite also technically started by indie studios, or created by studios that were formerly indie and then went mainstream as a result of their popularity. And people play the crap out of those games because they're cool games, not because they happen to be like the most popular, mainstream game. They just happen to have fun gameplay experiences. So our philosophy is we can continue to curate games of that quality, that caliber, but widen the scope. So it's not just shooters and it's not just Madden, it's not just Rocket League, that we could incentivize everyone within a given educational community to engage in this activity, right? If you had a racing game and a fishing game and a puzzle game and a fighting game, even if you could potentially even fully shift away from shooting games, which is what our approach is, because we don't need them. If 75% of the games, PC games, or games on the PC market, most likely the global market, are made by independent game developers, and if Brawlhalla and Rocket League can be successful, we can build an entire catalog of games that will engage the entire student community and never have to introduce a shooting game.
That is a pretty powerful statement. And I know that there's a lot of people. I'm one of those who look at Overwatch and go, it's comical. It's derivative. It's nothing. I mean, it's a derivative of all the other games we've played, like Call of Duty and Rainbow and all those. But it's made to look safe. And what you're saying is, to heck with that. There is so much great stuff out there. Let's just avoid. We don't need that altogether when there's such a fantastic library of potential titles that are already out there. And again, incentivizing it just so that the developers continue to develop and the gamers continue to seek them out and find these new titles.
You're right. And I think, and I definitely have to make sure I say this. I don't think this, I know this, that there is no research that concludes that violent games lead to school shootings. And actually the research is saying quite the opposite. So whenever I have these conversations, I make sure to say that. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't play violent games because they cause school shootings. No research indicates that. However, the public perception is that violent games lead to school shootings. And to that extent, parents don't want their students introduced or their kids introduced to that kind of experience. And then by extension, brands don't want to be associated with games that the parents who have the money don't want their students or kids associated with. So I believe if we expand outside of the shooting demographic, you create content experiences that are more relevant to specific businesses like real estate companies and skateboard shops and manufacturing companies. But you also create an environment where those companies feel comfortable putting their brand and their brand dollars into the ecosystem. And you've probably seen me go on events and soapboxes back and forth about how I see esports right now as a bubble. That's part of the reason. It's right. Unless you're MasterCard or Apple and someone of that caliber, you can't really, as a brand, as a business, you can't really get into the esports space because it doesn't make sense. It's not on brand for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The two things you said there, about the violence in video games. I had Dr. Chris Ferguson and Dr. Rachel Cohort, who are both research psychologists, who spoke about that. And in fact, as over the years, as gun violence has actually dropped in this country to some of the lowest. Teen violence has dropped to some of the lowest levels, while video game play has gone through the roof. So there's almost these competing graphs that show completely opposite growth and decline. But the other thing you said too, and gosh, now I'm sorry. Oh no, the other thing you said too is one of the questions I get asked a lot is, what can we do for elementary school kids? What can we do for middle school kids? And I don't want to give them Overwatch. Even though they may say, and right now it's like, well, here's Minecraft and here's Rocket League, and that's about it.
That's about it, right?
And we do need incentives because, again, these are places where kids are starting to play, and they're picking up things again. You've got some elementary school and middle school kids who are stepping onto gaming platforms where there's 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, young men, men and women. And me as a parent, it makes me a little uncomfortable to think, how do we introduce an elementary school child or a middle school child to a title? They say, boy, I really want to play it. Let's find them other titles that inspire them or lead them to eventually being able to be old enough and mature enough to exist in those spaces and have fun gaming experiences and learn along the way how to be good digital citizens while doing it.
I agree 100%. And again, what we're trying to do we're going to do in the higher ed space is use video games and blockchain to fundamentally redefine both the educational and the social experience at a university. And that's what we believe is unique to our product that doesn't exist across any of the other ecosystems, really at the higher ed or the K through 12 space, is because we know we have the connections across the industry because we've been in this space for 7 years with our previous business, and our fundamental understanding of blockchain and how that can, again, reimagine the student experience, the social experience, the connection between the universities and the community surrounding it. And then not just saying that when you're talking about professional esports, you're looking at either competitive play or live streaming. To your point earlier, there's broadcast, there's writing, there's game development. What I see commonly in the esports space is most people, yourself excluded, but many people in the space only really understand the gaming industry right at the point where they're playing the game for money or a prize, or they're live streaming it. They're missing all of that pre-production and all of that infrastructure that's not sports related.
Well, because again, this is where I think scholastic esports is very misunderstood by the professionals. Even, let's take Riot Games, for example. I've spoken out tremendously about their community guidelines because their community guidelines are they lumped high school and collegiate together. And I tried to make the case to them so many times, whether direct conversation or through the open letter, it was saying you need to separate the high school space from the collegiate space, because just because they're both schools doesn't mean that they have the same end goals. We are trying to, at the high school level, use esports as an educational tool to engage children and redefine athletic culture and promote good health and wellness. We're not trying to, again, get these kids to a pro scene. And again, colleges are using it as a recruiting tool and a retention tool. They're using it to try to get kids to come to their school and be part of their school and give their kids something to, while it sounds like what we're trying to do in high school, high school still is compulsory. College is not. So, we're trying to do it in those different ways. And I really believe that, yes, you alluded to earlier that there is an esports bubble. And I really believe that it's there. You see, I speak out against the rush to implementation in scholastic esports. There is a rush to implement pro esports at all facets. Good people. I mean, people who I really like who are getting into it now. Who you look at and go, why are you doing this? But what do you hope to gain out of it? What is your investment in this? And I believe that when the bubble does burst, because I believe that it will, whether it's when there's a cure for COVID or some other event happen. I mean, all the dirty laundry right now is coming out about esports. People can't keep turning a blind eye to it. But scholastic esports is still going to be there, and we're going to need systems like this, and we're going to need indie developers who want an audience that can help not just grow their game, but even inspire some kids to say, you know what, I found out from this developer that they did this entire game all by themselves, and I feel like either A, I can work with them to help make it better, or B, I can make a derivative that maybe now they become the developer in this case too, in some instances.
Yeah, so, and I think any developers would love that opportunity. And again, that's one of the things that we're banking on. Again, having worked with them for 7 years, they're bootstrap companies. They're short on finances. They're short on talent. So an intern, especially if it's a younger student who may be more motivated by the experience of being a part of a game development team than the actual pay, I think it's a win-win scenario. And I've also had the personal experience of getting things done much more quickly with indie studios than with their AAA counterparts. And nothing generally against AAA studios, but most of them are publicly traded companies, and they have that infrastructure that you would expect from a publicly traded company. So that there's red tape and there's delays and there's all these levels of approval. And what I learned in the last 7 years again is that I could just, send a message to somebody I know that we had in our community, and either that's the person that can make the decision or they're sitting next to the person who can make the decision.
And you said too that the system, the ecosystem that you all are developing around indie games and blockchain and the currency, that's still in development, right? You're still working through all of that. So nothing is released yet. Somebody hasn't missed out on this quite yet. You're still in the development phase right now of this idea, right?
Exactly. We have a global beta. It actually may end up being a national beta since I still have my full-time job, right? And I can't be in 10, 20 time zones at once, which is something I learned in our last company. But what we're looking to, I was up at 3 a.m., answering, Twitter messages and schedule.
Oh, no.
But what we're doing is we're introducing this to the schools so that they can have something that's a shared social experience for the entire student community. And then educating the faculty and staff, again, how to embed esports and gaming as kind of the carrot of STEAM to introduce students to the rest of what STEAM has to offer. So we've got our first school, again, a top-ranked NCAA school. Hopefully we'll be announcing that next week or the week after. And then we're going to open up that program to about 20 to 40 schools. The private beta is going to launch late this fall, roughly late October, mid-November. And then the public beta will launch at the Super Bowl next year when it comes here to Tampa Bay.
Very cool. And again, all the work that you've been doing, again, you're a tremendous follow on LinkedIn. I love seeing what you post. I love to see how you use data to openly challenge. Let me ask you this, because I know that there may be some administrators who may, especially high school, elementary, middle school administrators who may be nervous about this. With blockchain, what is I guess, again, we have to usually follow these terms of service, whether with a child, under 13 or whatever. Are there going to be issues around, I guess, accounts or do we still have to follow the same security protocol when it comes to kids and blockchain, or because everything is ledgered, everything is marked, everything that are all transactions, whether they're actual financial or something that exists in the database, is it going to make it a school administrator's job easier in this environment you're describing, or is it going to be we still have to do this, have the same protections and the same mindset of fidelity and taking a fiduciary responsibility towards our kids?
Both. You still need that responsibility, but the responsibility comes in on the front end. So the way that it works is when you create a new network, you have basically stakeholders, which may be the school system, it might be parents, and let's say it's the state government, right? Mm-hmm. All of you collectively agree to a set of basically terms and conditions about how the system will operate. So you might agree that the parent has assigned the student and that the parent automatically gets access to all of the student's records or whatever the transactions are in the system. And then once that is established, it gets locked into the code base and it's permanent, unless the collective group decides and votes to change or amend anything that's happening as a rule for that network. So if you put these safeguards and all of these levels of approval in on the front end, they happen automatically through a concept called smart contracts. So for example, I don't know if you remember, I think this was like 2 years ago, there was a E. coli scare with lettuce in Walmart.
Sure.
I think it was E. coli. I think that process normally takes Walmart to like 3 to 4 weeks, if not a couple of months, to trace the supply chain, if you will, from the store that had the actual contaminated lettuce all the way back to the farm. Because they had this system, the lettuce tracked on blockchain, they were able to do it within like a matter of hours. They turned a multi-week process because of smart contracts into a matter of hours to trace all of the channels from source to endpoint of where this lettuce was.
And to an educator who may still be listening to this, or a parent who may go, boy, this sounds really complicated. This sounds too hard. We have to think back that 20 years ago when I started teaching, I was given a red book to put all my students' grades in. I was given, and in that same red book, I was to include all of my lesson plans and everything. And now we've gone to a system where parents can get access to student grades 24/7. Teacher lessons can be posted up into Google Classroom videos. I mean, there's a lot of complex. And again, 20 years ago, all of what we're doing today in education sounds very complex. What you're describing to some people may think like, oh gosh, this system sounds so complex, but it's people like you, Marcus, who are developing ways to do it so that, I'm not saying turnkey, but will be in a way to, if I'm understanding right, help us to make that transition, make that shift to this more secure environment that hopefully you are work and several other people are starting to build.
And that's the goal for a lot of the thought leaders in the space, is how do we remove the friction and the complexity, both perceived and implemented in using blockchain. Again, this is best case scenario. In the future, you shouldn't even know that an app is running on the blockchain. You should just be able to enjoy the benefits of it. Again, having control over your data, the ability to grant permissions as you see fit, remove those permissions when you no longer want those granted, and not have your information be subject to hacks and misuse by the organization whose app you're using, right?
That's yeah.
Perfect example is the internet, right? 20 years ago, it was a big deal and very complicated. 20 years later, today, most people don't understand how the internet works. And ultimately, it doesn't matter how it works. As long as when you and I get on this app, it functions. You don't really care how it happens. So that's where I want blockchain to get to, where it's so intuitive that you're just using a regular app and it just happens to be powered by blockchain that gives you all the extra benefits. Just like, web games are now just games, and mobile games are technically still mobile games, but it needs to get to a point where mobile games are just games, just like console games are just games. So blockchain games will just be another game that happens to have all of these extra benefits to it.
The what you described, I hope when people download this podcast episode in 20 years, and you and I are much older, they look at this and go, oh, what they were describing, well, that's just matter of fact. That's just how it is. Of course it's that way. Why would it be any different? Marcus, if people want to learn more about you or about the work that you're doing, where can they best find you? And other than I'm going to recommend highly that they follow you on LinkedIn, but where else can they find information about the work that you do, or the organization? You talked earlier about the Tampa Association for Gaming. Where else can they find more about you?
Probably just LinkedIn. That's a great first recommendation. I'm on Facebook, Marcus Esports Howard, just like Marcus Esports Howard on LinkedIn. On Twitter, there are two of me. I have an identical twin brother. I have a Medium blog that I haven't made time to update in about 6 months or more, so don't go there. But if you do, it's a good read from the last few times that I did update it. But mostly just LinkedIn. You can also email me directly, marcus@projectmq.com. Again, we're in the middle of a rebrand, so maybe here in the next 4 weeks, while I may still have that email address and forward it to the new domain, I'm shifting away from Project MQ because it's an idea whose time has come.
I do have one more thing to ask you, because I think this was a really important part of your story too. And I'm sorry I didn't bring it up at the beginning, but I think it's important. We can close with this too, because you did talk about your identical twin brother. What was the first game that you guys played together? Because I thought it was a very important story that you shared in a video that you sent me. So what was that first game that you all played?
Super Mario Brothers 3 on the NES. Yeah. And it inspired a love of technology for us. And in the 9th grade, it actually inspired us to start building our first indie video game on the TI-83 Plus graphing calculator.
When you were telling that story, I remembered I had the TI-83 as well when I was in college. And they allowed us for the first time to use that calculator in college as and so what I taught myself to do for the calculus class was how to program it so that I could do all of my calculus equations using the program. Second semester, they said, oh, by the way, that calculator thing you told you to use, we're taking that away now. You kind of had a similar experience with your TI-83 as well too, right?
That's right. It's funny because, we were in magnet school, and I thank my parents for pushing us, for our educational limits to do more and be more, because certainly we didn't have the motivation ourselves. And now I do, but I didn't as a 16-year-old, 15-year-old. But at that program, that first year, the magnet school program was trying to teach us to learn coding to build websites. And Malcolm and I had zero interest in learning how to code for the purpose of building websites. But as soon as we learned, like literally the day after we learned that you could put video games on the calculator and that those games are made with code, we both started diving into code because we wanted to build our own game, right?
Sure.
And unfortunately for us and the rest of the class, we taught everyone else how to install games on their calculators. So our trigonometry teacher is teaching on the whiteboard. She turns around and no one's paying attention because we're all playing like Drug Wars and Tetris and the little Mario clone. So while we were all at lunch, she went by each of our calculators and wiped the memory to wipe the games, but it also destroyed our game because it was stored in the memory on the calculator.
Oh, that's so brutal. But, again, it's amazing where these instances come from, where these inspirations come from. And Marcus, it sounds like you are looking to, again, build another generation of inspired gamers who are going to help developers, and developers are going to inspire gamers, vice versa. Through your work with blockchain, through your work with indie games. Marcus, Howard, thank you so much for being a guest today on the Academy of Esports podcast.
Thank you as well. This has been awesome.
That will do it for this week on the Academy of Esports. I've been your host, James O'Hagan. Esports are organized competitive video games allowing schools to redefine their athletic culture, diversify opportunities for student participation, promote good physical and mental health, increase collegiate scholarship pathways, and play games. We can never forget the importance of play. The mission of the Academy of Esports is to support these ideals. The vision of the Academy of Esports is for all students to experience the fun and joy of playing competitive video games. You may follow me on Twitter at Jim O'Hagan. That's at JimOhhagan. And through the Academy of Esports account at TAO Esports. It's a great way to get the latest blog posts, podcast episodes, and news coming out of esports and education. And remember, you can continue your engagement by going to www.taoesports.com. You can also connect through Facebook at www.facebook.com/TAO Esports. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to our time again next week.